I am Willie Poinsette.
I'm Bruce Poinsette.
And how long have you two lived in Lake Oswego?
Since night,
Go ahead.
I was going to say since 1986. Haven't done the math on it.
Yeah, no, we can do the math.
Okay.
So you just talk about where you were living prior to that and what brought you to LO.
Well, I'll start. I was living in Paterson, New Jersey, and I was single at that time. I got married to Bruce Poinsette and moved out here. So that's why I started here and moved here in 1986.
Yeah, Dad?
Okay. So moved here in 1986. Prior to here, lived in the Selwood district of Southeast Portland.
Mm-hmm. But you're not originally from Oregon, right?
No, I'm originally from Charleston, South Carolina.
So curious, what brought you to Oregon?
University of Oregon, 1966.
Got it. So you're living in Southeast Portland at the time, but what was it about Lake Oswego versus maybe staying in Portland?
It was basically a deal on real estate for number one. We had looked in other areas. We looked in Tigard, looked in Beaverton, what have you, but circumstances had it. Excellent deal came about for this house.
And to add to details or not, I was a principal in New Jersey and I had applied to Portland Public Schools for a job. And I needed to have a job signed and sealed for us to really get a house. And we got a good deal here. And so it worked out that we could move here in Lake Oswego. It was a good deal, and it was because of Bruce's relationship with people.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say, had he not had that relationship, we would not have been able to get the house.
Okay. And, obviously there's, the big Lake No Negro reputation, but had you heard that when you were thinking about moving?
No, I had no idea. I had never heard of Lake Oswego. My second trip actually to Oregon. So I didn't know anything about the areas or the history.
So how would you say, like specifically in terms of, like race relations, that LO has changed since you moved in, or in some ways hasn't, I guess. But I guess what was it like when you first moved in?
I was totally shocked because I came from a very mixed community. I came from the city, came from an area where there were lots of people who looked like me. There were lots of people who spoke different languages. It was a mixed group, but in my area, the largest group were Black people. And so I was used to going to the supermarket, seeing people who look like me and talking, going to stores. And I came to Lake Oswego and I didn't know anyone but Bruce. So I just stayed in the house until I had to go shopping. And I remember on my first trip, a lady looked around and grabbed, white lady, and grabbed her purse out of the cart. And I was ready to go back into being my New Jersey side and say something to her about it. But then I realized, you know, this is sort of a, at the time I would call it sort of a bedroom kind of, you didn't see people out. Now I see people out more. I guess it's because I'm out. But now I realize that, or then I realized that, oh, I think we might be the only Black. And after, I can't remember the gentleman up the street, that I realized there was another person in the neighborhood. So first time for me living in a white area, I was blown away and didn't really know how to act because I came from the segregated South in the beginning. And this was just not what I was used to.
So Dad, you've been in Oregon for a little bit longer, obviously by that time, but like how did you view Lake Oswego?
Well, here again, I was not aware of the history of Lake Oswego. Make a long story short, it was never, it was not something that was discussed around the people that I was with living in Selwood and what have you. And no, the conversation didn't come up. And like Willie said, yes, we were basically number 2 in the neighborhood. Our neighbor up the street was the only other one of us that I knew of at the time, because I didn't know the Pruitts at the time, so I didn't realize that there was another family also in the not so immediate area.
So in terms of, one, dealing with just Lake Oswego and the atmosphere in general, but then specifically in terms of actually finding community and, finding other Black people, other people of color, what kinds of things did you do, have you done?
It was
Well,
hard for me, I will say. I worked in Portland and I was greeted with, oh, you live in Lake Oswego. And then that's when I heard, oh, Lake No Negro. And I had no clue what that meant. And I felt like I was an outsider. And I have to tell you, I was treated like an outsider for a while by the people I worked with, that they were the only ones I knew. And not the white people, they didn't say like no Negro to me, but the Black, some of the Black administrators said it. And I didn't know. And, but slowly, but I learned the history and I learned what they were saying to me and why they said it. Most of the people of color that I met weren't pleased that I was in Lake Oswego. And I don't know if they formed something. They didn't know anything. When they started to see my husband, they would say, oh, okay. I thought, and this is just in my mind, that they were thinking that I was married to a white male or something there. And that's why I was in Lake Oswego. Maybe I married a rich person or something. Just stories that people could just make up because they didn't know. And Bruce and I were homebodies. We didn't really go out and hang out with people. We didn't go and stay out in the yard. Not at that time anyway.
Yeah, would you like to add anything to that?
It was kind of interesting. At the time I was employed with the state of Oregon and transitioned to Liberty Northwest Insurance. And in both instances, no one ever said anything to me about Lake Oswego, including, and I think back, I had associations with 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 contractors, for instance, that actually lived here. And I saw them quite often. None of them ever expressed any, anything about the history of the town. And it's interesting because even today, I have a direct relationship, again, because of being on the Development Review Commission. The presiding officer of that commission lives here in Lake Oswego, and I met him in 1974, and knew him throughout that whole period. Never heard anything about all of this.
So I want to go back to that piece about finding community, because you, obviously, as your son, I do know a little bit more about both of your backstories than most of these interviews, but there are places where you two did, find some semblance of community, whether it be the church or, other spaces. Can you just talk about that some more?
For mine, it was the church. So one of the things I asked about was, well, a couple things. I asked, where can I get my hair done? A Black beautician, or, to get my hair done. And I was actually sent to Penny's. They said Penny's had a salon there, and there was a lady, one Black beautician there. And so that's where I started. A couple of
just to stop you really quick, you said, Penny's and JC Penny's, but yeah, you
in
should
Portland.
In Portland, but where at? Because it doesn't exist
Downtown
anymore.
Portland.
At what place?
I mean, I didn't know anything. Downtown
At Lloyd Center,
Portland.
right?
Lloyd Center.
Center, yes. But I didn't know the area there. So at Lloyd Center, and then I asked about churches as I started to talk to people, and a couple of folks suggested about 3 different churches, I guess. And we tried them out. I was looking for community, but I didn't realize it then. The fact that we lived in Lake Oswego would set us apart, and not so, people weren't so welcoming. You live in Lake Oswego, and so that made a difference, even with Black people, until they got to know us. And it's still it's still an issue, I have to say. We have many friends now, but it's been a long journey to get to trying to find community. And we were really, if I want to be really, really truthful about it, we don't really have a community with what I call my people, my people. And I don't know why. I think it's because for me, it's because I just came from a different kind of place and interaction, and more first of all, more of Black people living in there, and then interacting with them. And having been here for so long, it's not an easy place for you to just, as a Black person, to just jump in and be a part of the crowd. Not here in Lake Oswego. It wasn't like that. And it's a little better now, but that took work to get to that point. I'm sorry, Bruce, I may have cut you off.
Well, basically the same sort of thing. And I think back on it, you talk about community. When I went to work for the state in 1973, there were actually only 2 of us that were in the position of being trained as safety, occupational safety compliance officers. Me in construction, and it was a lady in general industry. Oddly enough, the lady in general industry, her name was Nettie White, related to Dwight Ford, the Johnson family, and a whole bunch of people we met at Ainsworth later on. But still, there was no connection, you know, even through Nettie, there was no connection really with the black, quote, the Black community here in Portland.
But through church,
Through church.
we found community with Nettie's family,
Right.
extended family there. And that became our group. We spent holidays with them, and church. And when you were born, you were introduced to the family, is what we call, and you had that was almost your community, I would say.
So obviously I was
Baby.
there, for the experience, but from both of your perspectives, can you just talk about, having a child who came up, in the LO school system, spent, all my formative years, sort of in that dichotomy of, growing up in LO and going to school in LO while also, having some semblance of community, outside of LO, but not also, I guess, really fitting into that either.
So from a mother's perspective and an educator's perspective, Bruce A, I'll say, people often call you junior, and you're not a junior, you're Bruce A. But for school, actually before you went to preschool, I had you at babysitters in Portland, and it was a nice. It's a family from Nicaragua, and so we got to learn. You more so, a little bit of Spanish, and you got a little culture there from the Nicaraguans, but they were married family had people other than Nicaraguans in there. And so you had a lot of Black people there, Chinese people, and you met, there was a family, and it felt like a real community there. And when we were with them, and then I put you in preschool in Lake Oswego. I'm just trying to do the right thing, I thought. Preschool, where they didn't believe that you were as smart as you were. That was one of the things. And you were the only Black person in the school. And you were there right before you turned 3. You started before you turned 3, and you stayed through the end of 3rd grade, I think. I'm trying to remember, Bruce. I think
I'm thinking that's about right.
That's right. Okay. And I had a parent. Well, during that time, you had, I think, another Black student that was there for about a half a year. Otherwise, you were the only one. There were no Black teachers, so he had no other people of color that he could relate to. And at least I think so. You may have found some little friends, and you tried to be friends with people. Teachers, some teachers were okay, but we had one who didn't believe you or anyone that had dark skin. So there was a Middle Eastern kid in the class, and the teacher did whatever she could not to try to teach you. It's what? She let you play while the other kids were learning to read. And this is in kindergarten there still. And it was a very hurtful time. It's a time that I could say I saw Bruce, my child's personality start to change. He went from being this happy kid, happy, to shutting down. I didn't realize it then, even though I was an educator. I think I was trying to do too much, trying to be an educator and fit in, trying to be a parent and fit in, trying to be a wife and fit in. These were a lot of new things for me. And looking back on it, I could have used community to help me through this. I could have used a real community. I could have used some support. And I just thought, well, I have to do it all on my own. And it was hard. But it's hard. I don't know if I had, friends in Lake Oswego that I could connect with, because even though there were other Black people, there were families, but I had no idea they were here. I didn't run into them in the supermarket. So we were different, we didn't go to church here. Still don't know if any of them go to church here. So it's like, I come into my house, so it's not a welcome. It's not I see go down the streets now driving, and I see people, talking and, laughing, and we live by the park, so I can hear people going through the park laughing. And I never got connected to that culture, I guess I would say. And so even though I've been here, I'm still a loner. I live here, but I can't call it my home. Home means something different to me. And go ahead, Bruce, before I.
Well, I have to agree 100%. By and large, I've run into people, both professionally and in this area, that for whatever reason, they do not think we are as intelligent as they are. And consequently, they downplay us. And when they do find out, it comes as a cultural shock. That's what the best way I can put it.
Yeah, so to talk about, I guess, how things have, where we're at now, because it's not just that there's been, an emergence of groups, be it Respond to Racism or LO for Love or Black Women of Lake Oswego, but obviously, Mom, you were a central figure in this as the co-founder of Respond to Racism. So can you just briefly talk about, one, what Respond to Racism is? And, I think we've seen a lot of people, talk about, again, how LO has changed since RtR and these other groups have emerged. But in terms of how you feel about, on the ground, like, do you feel the same sense of optimism that you hear our particularly white counterparts speaking on?
I want to think that.
Well, first, can you just talk about what
it is?
Yeah.
What happened? Well, one day, just looking through reading through the social, what did they call? A little social next door, excuse me. Reading through that, and recognizing that there's a conversation going on for me, like the first time here. And this is 2017. So I've been here since 1986. 2017, a conversation about how terrible it was that this Black man put something on his blog about a racist incident that happened. And that the conversation was about, well, that makes us racist, make us look like we are racist in Lake Oswego. And obviously these were not Black people talking, okay. And so it went back and forth, and the person, and what happened is the story, and it's the beginning of a movement here. So starting with that conversation, there was a young white person there that was said that they'd had training and could talk, sit down and talk with some people, and invited folks to talk with them. Well, I said, I've dealt with it. I've had some training around racism and dealing with racism. I've had training with from the school district. I was willing to sit down. Plus, I said, I'm a Black person born from the South, so I came from a segregated group society, as I would say, where we didn't cross the line, or it could be deadly to cross the lines there. And so for me to be in Lake Oswego, it was a really different experience. So anyway, we talked. I offered to help, and the other person said, okay, I'll send out the invitation to everybody. And the only person that responded for that first meeting with the person, and it was like, well, I said, let's put it out again. And let's put it out, the announcement from the two of us. So you had a white person and a Black person coming together saying, let's sit down and talk about racism in Lake Oswego. And we got through my contacts with the church, actually, and because of you, Bruce A., my son, had spoken at the Lake Oswego United Church of Christ. They invited him because of something in his life. They saw an article that he wrote in the paper about how he had been impacted by racism in, well, you, so as my son, how you've been impacted by racism in Lake Oswego. And that church was just starting to study about racism and social justice, and invited him to speak. And so there was a connection. So all of these little pieces, we didn't know that they would all connect with our family being at the core. My son at the core of talking about his experiences that led us to talk more. And the incident of a reading from next door brought in another avenue. So anyway, what we did, the other person, whose name is Liberty, put out the announcement, invited people, and we had 66 people showed up. And was there in the fellowship hall of the Ainsworth United Church of Christ. It wasn't the church.
Lake Oswego.
I mean,
Lake Oswego.
excuse me. Lake Oswego United Church of Christ, and the LOUCC. Anyway, people there said, some people said racism. They didn't think there was any racism. They didn't know anything about racism. And a couple of people sort of hinted, well, yes, they had some experience. But the good thing that came out of that is that we were planning to have just one meeting, and they wanted to meet again. And so we asked the church, and they gave us the space, and we met again, and they wanted to meet again and again. And that was July of 2017. And now we are in 2022, and we're still meeting every month.
And you're doing more than
what
that.
Pardon me?
And you're doing more than that.
Oh yeah, but I'm just saying from one meeting
That's one
that we're still going. And so
I'm sorry to accelerate you a little bit, but I
Okay.
do want you to talk about the larger scope, like, because RtR is involved in a lot. It's not just monthly meetings.
Yes, we are, and it might help if you ask me some questions so I can get it, okay?
Talk about the different things RtR does.
So RtR is respond to racism. We have built a relationship with the city, and the city now is celebrating Juneteenth, Martin Luther King Day, the Asian American Pacific Islanders. We're doing something for our Native Americans. We're doing something for all of the cultures pretty much here now in Lake Oswego. And that started, I want to say, from a conversation about race and racism, and they're honoring people. When we had our first Juneteenth, and people were like, what's Juneteenth? Well, now the city gives us money to help have a Juneteenth celebration, and they're giving money to others. And now we have our, even the students have gotten involved in school. And that came from not just respond to racism, but we were the beginning. And then we had others and talked to others and talked about bringing out and talking openly about the racism that exists in Lake Oswego. Is it gone? No, no. We've got a long way to go, but things are better. You see people talking to one another. You see people asking questions. You see activities happening, and you see more people of color moving into this town. If you ask me a direct question, I can probably focus it more.
I'd ask, and we'll start with Dad this time. I want to hear from both of you. So we talked a little bit about how things have evolved, but where would you like to see LO go from here, specifically in regards to communities of color in the city?
Where should LO go from here?
Yeah.
One of the avenues that I know is being examined, you may not call it out as being related to race, but the housing issue. And that is something that affects everyone. The conversation kind of gained a little bit of traction when it was stated that, you know, a beginning school teacher, a beginning police officer, a fireman, what have you, these folks can't afford to live in Lake Oswego. They serve Lake Oswego, can't live here. You know, it's pretty interesting when you go to Tualatin and then see a Lake Oswego publicly owned vehicle parked in a driveway in Tualatin. Kind of tells you something. But the city is looking at it. There's a project going in at Merrillhurst, what used to be Merrillhurst University. There will be 100 units of quote affordable housing with related services. Looking at another project that'll probably go in on Boone's Ferry. But here again, the housing, the affordability of people with incomes lower than, than what would be needed to buy $1 million home will be able, to live here. That's important. And we're starting to actually see more people of color in different places. You take a look at the city council now. The city council, the makeup, got Asian, got a Black person. The makeup is different. People employed, a person employed in City Hall. I'm sitting on a commission. This wasn't done years ago. This plain didn't exist. And I think as people get to know one another, hopefully the situation will improve. Will, you got some comments on that?
Well, I think you hit the elected officials. We've had a Latinx school superintendent. So, we look back around and say, wow, we still have some people of color in administrative roles at the school district, here for the city. And that was just not seen when I came here in 1986. I didn't even see a Black teacher in 1986. Maybe there was one, but I don't think so, not to my knowledge. And so being able to come to the table now, because the other groups have started. We have LO for Love, and LO for Love did something really awesome. And that was started by just a couple people, some moms, where we had a very racist, openly racist business person on the main street in LO, and said he used his free speech to write racist stuff and post in his window. And there was supposed to be a march in support of him. And some people from the far right, I guess, would say, were coming in. Well, this group of moms organized a group, large showing of people from the city who stood on one side of the street where they are supposed to be marching, and across from the far right ones in support of this man, business person, racist business person, to be more specific about it. They literally, with the force of that group of people shouting, and I'm talking about a group of mostly white people, I want to say that, shouting and saying, you don't belong here, we don't want you here. They literally ran. That man got in his car and packed up and left the next day. He was gone out of here. And that, I don't think would have happened when I first moved here, and so Respond to Racism was not an organization at that time, but we quickly hooked up with the person who was working and leading LO for Love, because they started out, they wanted to buy multicultural books for the kids, for the schools, because they had no images and books of color. So kids were just seeing other people that look like them. Well, because we have a lot of industries around, A lot of people come from different countries, and they're not necessarily white people. And so bringing in multicultural and having our own homegrown people who live here who are of color start to see some books in schools or get something. And so the library now is involved, and they're actively involved. They're in, Respond to Racism is involved with them, and work on bringing in speakers of color. And so I guess I just see the city as being a little more open and welcoming. We have a mayor now who is welcoming, and that's really good. And we have council people who are welcoming and wanting to do things. And so it's happening. It's happening. We have, in addition to, I was starting to name some people, organizations, we have another African-American woman who decided that she was going to organize a group of ladies from Lake Oswego and all around, because she started seeing them. And what happened, people will see you in a line shopping or something and invite them to join. It's more of a social area, but it's where people are networking. It's more than social, it's networking and really getting to know what's going on and our people. And we have some great people of color around here now. They weren't there when I came. Bring me back on task.
Nope, that's what I was looking for. Yeah, thank you again for taking the time this afternoon. Is there anything else either one of you would like to add?
We now have something else that's kind of unusual. We have a minority construction firm that's actually building a good-sized project in downtown Lake Oswego. And we wouldn't have seen that a few years back.
People are talking about race relations and trying to make them better. People are talking about welcoming the group. We didn't know, but the Baha'i community has joined forces with Respond to Racism. And there's a Race Amity Day that's coming up where they've invited people from all different groups and different people of ethnicities to come and talk about race, have some time to share. And they're going to have people share from all over the city and to share what they're doing around racism and race relationships. And so thinking back on that day in July of 2017, where we had our meeting and people didn't know about race or racism, you know, one of the beginning things we did was the meetings, and the meetings are still important because people have to get some information, feel comfortable. And I think people feel now. In the beginning, I mean, I remember one person at a meeting said to me, how do I talk to a Black person? You know, how do I don't know how. And so for me, I was like, well, just like anybody else, but I didn't realize I was insensitive in terms of myself, of understanding that there's a lot of folks who are afraid because of the negative images that were portrayed of Black people and people coming in from different countries. And we have to really keep working on that. That's working together. I know we have to do more in-person connections with people so that we can see, we don't have horns growing out of our bodies or something crazy, but we want to keep working together. And that's my goal. That's what I've spent many hours, days, nights, trying to say, build race relations, real a place that's welcoming to all people. And that's what respond to racism, because we have racism across the board here and around, and we know what's happening in our country and in our world. But we have to start somewhere, and Lake Oswego is a place that's on the job.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for taking the time today, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.